Welcome to Political Misfits. We are joined for this conversation by Steve Grumbine. He joins us very often. He is an economist himself. He's the host of several podcasts on modern monetary theory and politics. In particular, I'm looking for the list right now so I cannot miss one. He's a founder and CEO of nonprofits Real Progress and Real Progressives, Real Progress in Action. He hosts Macro and Cheese. Steve Grumbine, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. And just for the record, I am not an economist, but I am a macroeconomic activist that is trained in it. But I think the people that I talk to would laugh a little bit if they hear me.
Oh, you are an economic analyst who we love to lean on.
Go.
And I thought, I mean, honestly, truly, Steve, I saw this headline and I thought, I'm going to just throw this to Steve Grumbine and I'm going to duck. So here is the headline. This is from Politico. Liberals dreamed of this economy for decades. What if voters don't like it? And I just thought, like, you see this, like, this is what they wanted. Why is everyone so unhappy? And so the gist of the story is, for years, economic thinkers on the left, I'm going to put a little asterisk there, but Politico says economic thinkers on the left pushed for more government spending and urged the Federal Reserve to be less paranoid about inflation with the goal of driving unemployment as low as possible. Their thinking was that workers could demand higher wages as employers competed for employees. With those higher wages, people could spend more, which would create demand, and then companies would invest in technology to better meet demand, which would fuel productivity. So you would have higher wages, higher growth, and higher productivity, a win-win-win. We appear to be headed down that exact path, and yet Americans don't seem very enthused. And here's Politico's diagnosis: because they really hate inflation. So once again, everything is actually fine. It's just the emotions of the American public that are getting in the way, because doggone it, we just hate inflation. And of course, I want to ask you what the problem is with this description of the economy that liberals have been begging for and have indeed created. And I will say I have spotted one already, which is wages. Because it is pretty hard for workers to demand better wages when unions are crushed and when the biggest companies in the country are effectively subsidized by the U.S. government by paying their staff so little that they qualify for food stamps and other assistance. So go ahead, Steve. Liberals have gotten the economy that they dreamed of. Why is everyone so unhappy?
Yeah, I think before we get into liberals are happy, which is humorous, let's go back in time to a guy named Ignaz Semmelweis. This is a guy who accidentally discovered that washing your hands with chlorine and bleach would take away the funky smell that came from working with cadavers. Never mind the fact that they found a precipitous drop in deaths of mothers who were giving birth as these students would go from room A, working with cadavers without washing their hands, in to deliver babies, and all of a sudden women were dying of these horrible infections. They couldn't figure it out. And so Ignaz Semmelweis realized, oh my God, we're killing these microbes by washing with chlorine and bleach. We're literally killing the bad stuff that's causing these deaths. And watch, the deaths stopped immediately. But he was treated like a pariah, and he ended up dying in an asylum crazy because they just rejected it. But years later, they realized, oh, yeah, by the way, you wash your hands, you don't kill people, right? And so that's sort of like what's going on here with this inflation story, okay? People don't like inflation, not because inflation in and of itself is bad, but because, as you rightly pointed out, wages haven't gone up. And so wages not going up. I mean, inflation, what is that really? It's just somebody's income is going up, but somebody else's income is not going up to make that feel okay. So part of this is just an asymmetrical understanding of the economy. You know, you see one thing, inflation. Inflation is not something that just naturally occurs. It's not like, raindrops or oxygen and, cold air and things like that. Inflation is something that is manufactured. And what we found is that some 60% of the inflationary pressures that came from what would have been a one-time spike from watching a global supply chain collapse occur and having not enough supply to meet demand. But what we found is that because a lot of people out there that have a lot of radio shows and TV shows and other things nonsensically said they printed money, so we're going to have inflation. The people that actually control these corporations said, hey, they already think there's going to be inflation, so we can jack our prices up because, after all, it's inflation. And 60% of the inflation was called seller's inflation, and that's a very, very kind way of saying price gouging.
Yeah.
Now, we always forget, like, I don't know, one of the things that I'm beginning to realize was really important about algebra back in the day was that you had to solve the problem. It was on two sides of the equal sign. When you were young and you were doing 1 + 1 = 2, you only had one thing on the equal side, and what that was the answer. But once you got into algebra, you were working two sides of the problem. And in this case, we have a dialectical issue here where we're only looking at, hey, prices went up and wages didn't go up, but we didn't look at the fundamental reason why that happened. And so instead of being mad at the master for raising prices, because after all, we have another split personality. When we work in those companies and the company's doing well, we do well, supposedly, although that's part of the problem. We're not doing well.
Yeah.
And so within this capitalist system, what you have is those with power and means get more powerful or more meaningful, while the people without power who are selling themselves and their labor to these vultures literally get oppressed while they watch the alienation of their own work from the actual product they're producing. They're watching that asymmetry occur in real time, and they're angry. But because they don't understand economics, they're blaming it on print and money. They're blaming it on, well, they spent money, so now we got inflation.
Yeah.
Nobody ever stops to ask the why, but I'm here to tell you the why, and the why is seller's greed.
And it's not I imagine it is not an accident that we have seen this stagnation in wages occur at the same time we've seen this steady destruction of unions and of union activity, right? Because it is, individual workers cannot pressure their employers for better wages when, as you say, like the fortunes of the company improve, and so the fortunes of everyone improve. Well, that only happens when collectively you can force the company to improve your fortunes,
Yes. At a macro level, though, we have another creature here, and we've talked about this at different times, but I'm going to roll it into this conversation because I think it might be the most important thing. What really irritates me about the economic profession, a lot of these economists, is that even the ones that are happily beating their chest that, hey, we learned deficit spending doesn't kill us because, look, inflation is coming back down, right? And they're not wrong. Deficit spending is fantastic. The issue is that what the deficit spending was over the last year and a half or so, aside from war and funding these kind of weird proxies around the world, has been the interest income channel, okay? When you raise interest rates, that is money going somewhere, right? And where that money is, it's brand new money. And so when brand new money is spent, it's given to people who already have money. And so the rich get richer. So on paper, remember GDP, all these gross domestic product, things like that, it's a measurement of the nation's total income without any kind of moral judgment. So all this interest income goes in there to keep the economy from looking like it's in recession. But in reality, it's not going to Main Street. It's going to the rich. But because we have a lot of employed people, doesn't say anything about how good their jobs are, doesn't say anything about when the last time they got a pay raise was. It just looks like we have a lot of employed people. People beat their chest, say low employment, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, we've got this inflation. And I think it's really important to understand that the reason people are angry is because the quote unquote deficit spending, most of it, and in fact, a large amount of it, came through this interest income channel to the rich to give a false positive at an aggregate level that all is well. And so this is what people are really complaining about. They don't know it because they're not thinking through it, but they know something's wrong, and that's the what's wrong. That is it right there.
And, it's not the responsibility of every single American who is, raising a family, who's an expert in another topic, et cetera, to be able to describe this fully. I think that when people are saying we feel pessimistic about our incomes, we feel pessimistic about our financial stability, et cetera, I think it's a lot more correct to say that they are, as you say, they are sensing something that they can't explain, than what the likes of, we'll use favorite punching bag Paul Krugman, for example, will say in the New York Times, which is just that, like, we're affected by negative vibes on social media. It's like, oh, everybody's actually doing great. Everybody's flush. We've just all been, we've been brainwormed by Putin into feeling like the economy is bad. No, and like just because a person can't explain in sort of macroeconomic terms what they are feeling doesn't mean that they are brainwashed.
This is so true. Let me tell you, obviously, what I'm telling you has taken a lot of work, paying attention specifically to not only voices that I care about, but voices who I've grown to trust. Even if we don't share the same political ideology, I'd still listen. And everybody doesn't have to do that. But you must understand, not only is knowledge power, but they know that you don't know.
Yeah.
And so that allows them to do these things. And without a state, without representation, without agency to affect that, to have people that really do understand these things. I mean, let's just pretend for a minute we have a functioning democracy. I don't believe we do, but let's just say we do. The people that are in power, those people that are now in Congress, those people that are in genuinely don't understand economics any better than the average frickin' table salt shaker. And so with that in mind, they're making laws, they're talking big speeches, they're acting like they're large and in charge, but in reality, they're fundamentally giving air cover to the biggest theft of GDP in the nation's history. And so as long as we understand that there's an asymmetrical relationship between knowledge and information, and the use of that asymmetry is what's causing so much pain and misery in society today. I think it's very important to understand that without a knowledge of the weapons of war that they're using against us, and it is war. I know we don't like to think of it that way, but I'm telling you, it is absolutely predating upon the poor. It is war at every level. It is class war, whatever you want to call it. And I think that in fairness, they're going to keep doing it as long as they can get away with it. And they will be able to get away with it because we don't have a functioning democracy.
Yeah, let me ask you, Steve. I think that, well, I'll ask this anyway. I feel like this is just going to, I know where this is going to go, but we got some more economic indicators. We got indicators on inflation earlier this week showing that the consumer price index was up 3.9% year on year, which got called stubborn. Inflation is stubborn. It's sticking around. Today, we're seeing a larger than expected rise in wholesale prices. Yesterday, we saw a larger than expected drop in retail spending by Americans. And so again, like, what should this indicate to us about how Americans in general are experiencing this economy?
Very asymmetrically.
Yeah.
I mean, the rich are doing well. And quite frankly, let me just be honest. The people that are beating their chest saying how great the economy is, it'd be nice to see their stock portfolio and their investments, because I have a feeling that they're not the ones that are worrying about whether they can pay the electric bill this month.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, I think that you also see fundamentally, you say wholesale prices. Let's talk about that. Prices government pays for goods and services set the base for the price. They are the initial entry into the price anchor, if you will. They set the bar by what they pay. Because remember, when a government spends money into existence, they're buying something. And so whatever price the government agrees to buy it for, it sets the base price from which wholesale leaps to retail and vice versa. And I think it's important to understand that the government doesn't tell us that, nor does, any of the politicians tell us that. Interestingly, and you guys have to know, I know, John, you like him. I can't stand RFK Jr. And he actually had a moment of, wow, he actually got it in a speech that I heard. And I said, daggone it, I got to give the devil his due. He called out the straight skinny on the way the system is operating to provide the air cover for not only price hikes, but fattening up the corporate bosses. I mean, he said it great. He talked about the military industrial complex being used as a money laundering operation, basically, and how it's an opportunity to spend there, and it gets to the donor class. It gets to the people they want it to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually, I've not agreed with him on many things. That was one thing where I stood up and said, well, I'll be damned.
Mm-hmm.
Good going, RFK Jr.
Mm-hmm. And there is, I mean, we talked about this in a prior show, but like I do feel as though this weird stock market indicator from I think last week that showed that this great stock market rally that's part of this evidence that the economy is doing so great is with the participation of fewer stocks than there are losers right now, right? So again, it's just like it's like an average gets dragged up because you have such a giant. You have such a huge discrepancy. You know what I mean? It's like this is a great economy for an extremely small number of people, and there is something sinister and powerful in telling everybody else that they're complaining about nothing, that they're seeing phantoms, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. It's always manufacturing consent, and that's what's going on, right? Don't believe your lying eyes.
Yeah, always. Let me also ask you about this wrangling over more funding for Ukraine. The White House tried to get this money out the door by tying border policy and funding to it. And after a lot of negotiation, they came up with a package about $100 billion in military aid, a little bit of humanitarian aid, and some big border policy changes. And then Donald Trump decided he wanted to be able to get tough on the border, not Joe Biden. So enough Republicans decided they couldn't vote for it, so it stalled. And now, apparently, a bipartisan group is trying to appease budget hawks by removing any humanitarian aid from the bill. So we'll have a slimmed down bill of $65 billion in purely military aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. It'll still have some border policy changes, but it'll be cheaper, and it will also have stripped out anything positive and humane. I also will say, I mean, I've seen polls, I haven't checked on this recently, but it makes it even less, I would say, the will of the American people who are consistently happy to, for example, support Ukraine, but who consistently want that support. They're much more enthusiastic about supporting them economically and in terms of humanitarian assistance than they are militarily. So it's like, it's still $65 billion. It's all military aid. It's sort of even more morally dubious and even less representative of the will of the people. And I don't know. I mean, they didn't have much luck last time, so I actually don't have a lot of, I don't know. I wouldn't put a lot of money on this passing. I was curious what you made of it.
Yeah, first of all, get rid of the will of the people. It doesn't exist. There's they don't care. I mean, Princeton study proved that. So moving past the idea that public sentiment has an impact, skip that. Where it comes in, Biden said the quiet part out loud. I was on with Jordan Sheraton on Status Quo the other day talking about this. And Biden said point blank, this is a jobs program for America. We're not sending money to Ukraine. We're buying the gear from our domestic manufacturers, and we're sending that to them. This is a jobs program. And I've been trying to tell folks this forever. The government spends money into existence, and that's how they get it around. So once you talk to people about, freedom, and we're going to fight for our freedoms, and they hate us for our freedoms, and we're going to go to war, we're going to protect Ukraine's freedoms, and we're going to, that resonates with a certain group of people, okay? And it allows them to spend. And what they're doing is this is a backdoor jobs program. This is a backdoor way of ensuring that even with all the other problems going on, that there is still money. Because guess what? You have 800 military bases around the world, but you've got military bases in every state in the union. And then you've got every single local community having various elements of either, if it's not bases, it's military production, it is whatever companies. So that money, that is a way of getting money into the economy so it doesn't tank out. again, we always think, oh, they need to cut spending. No, they have to spend to keep the economy afloat. They always have to spend to keep the economy afloat.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what they're doing. And what do you think they're going to do? They will, of course, strip away humanitarian aid. Why? Because humanitarian aid doesn't help U.S. military contractors. It doesn't do any of that. It might help agriculture by buying things from local U.S. farmers to send it abroad, but they're not going to actually gain anything from that. The only way to gain is to buy military products and then send the old stuff over to Ukraine and have the new stuff here for America. And that's standard fare. I mean, you should see some of the weaponry that we send around the world. It is not the latest, greatest. It's not even the next to latest and greatest. It's stuff that's obsolete that we're sending around the world and saying, we're done with this. Here you go. And we're having like a secondary market off it, if you will, a bump off the first, and then now let's get another life out of this old material and send it around the world. And so we do this. It's not just with military equipment, it's with industrial equipment as well. We send these old production things to Africa and say, be thankful you got our 1950s stuff. Be thankful that we've sent you our, sweatshops from, the Industrial Revolution.
And we're so insulted when they're not. Yeah.
I know, right?
Steve Grumbine, you've told us knowledge is power. You've told us it's important to understand the weapons of war that are used against us. So tell our listeners where they can find your work at Status Coup. Tell us what they can find at Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action and Macro and Cheese.
I am Macro and Cheese is my number one baby. It is a podcast that is released every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. You can get it on any podcast outlet, and just look up Macro, the letter N, and then Cheese. I do show up with Jordan Sheraton on Tuesday evenings for my show with Jordan on Status Coup. And hopefully, as I talked on last time with John, my mother is now in hospice, so my personal show that I did Monday, Wednesday, and Friday has been on hiatus. And I hate to say when it'll come back, because when it'll come back is probably sometime after my mom passes. But you'll have Rogue Scholar coming back shortly too, on Real Progress in Action.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Steve, and we're sending our good wishes to your mom.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks a lot.